What happens when you kill something humanity would have given everything to protect? It wasn't just a crime, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mistake here, the kind of mistake that changes galaxies. The day a human child was executed by the Galactic Council, the universe didn't hear screams or missiles or threats. It heard silence, cold, measured, unforgiving. Because Earth didn't scream for justice, Earth prepared for judgment. The child, 9 years old, unarmed, unaware of politics, it was caught in a dispute on a council-controlled trade colony. A miscommunication, they said, a containment breach, a regrettable act. But to Earth, no excuse would ever be enough. This wasn't the loss of a soldier or an asset. This was a child, a symbol of Earth's future. An innocent heartbeat that stopped because the galaxy forgot who it was dealing with. For centuries, humanity had fought to belong, to prove itself among the stars, to show restraint, to bury its past. The Council laughed behind closed doors, calling humans emotional, unstable, too sentimental to last in deep galactic politics. And Earth swallowed it all until now. Until that single heartbeat stopped. Until that Nami, the boy's name, encrypted and buried in morning phylactery, was returned to Earth's central memory core. And that's where the shift began. You see, Earth has always been a species of thresholds, tolerant up to a point, kinda until tested, peaceful until you give them a reason. That child's death, that was the reason. No one knew it then, but the moment that report reached Earth's defense grid, something deep beneath the surface activated. Systems that had been silent for centuries began humming to life. Forgotten failsafes blinked red for the first time in 500 years. Not a single Earth official ordered retaliation. Not one soldier launched an attack. Because this wasn't a military decision. It was biological. It was ancestral. It was personal. Earth didn't shout. Earth didn't cry. Earth simply a broken bar changed. Across hundreds of kilometers beneath the Atlantic Ocean, vaults long thought abandoned began opening. In orbit, civilian satellites were quietly pushed aside by invisible force fields activating around long-forgotten platforms. I-systems coded in lost dialects booted up with only one purpose: prepare the contingency. What was the contingency? Something that most humans had only heard of in legends and whispers. The thing even Earth's own leaders were forbidden to speak of unless the final protocol was triggered. It was never a weapon of power. It was a weapon of principle, designed for one thing: to answer the question, what happens when diplomacy fails to protect the most innocent among us? That answer had a name, a fleet, a myth, the God Fleet, created not to conquer, but to end, not to invade, but to erase. Ships built in humanity's darkest hour, each one capable of rewriting planetary orbit, hijacking gravity wells, bending matter and time around sentient cores. For centuries, these ships were hidden. Not out of fear of others but fear of ourselves. Because even humanity didn't want to remember what it could become if pushed far enough. And now it had been pushed. The Council didn't see it coming. They never could. Because they measured Earth by its current power, its visible forces, its trade agreements. But they never asked the deeper question: what does a race capable of infinite love become when it loses what it loves most? They found out. It began with silence. Communications to Earth slowed, then stopped. Council embassies went dark. Surveillance drones near Earth's orbit returned static. And yet, there were no explosions, no alerts, no signs of conventional warfare. Just the gathering storm. Then, finally, Earth spoke, not with words, but with action. The first ship to rise from the oceans didn't fire a single weapon. It didn't need to. Its presence alone triggered gravitational anomalies that knocked out orbital platforms. Its mere ascension shifted weather patterns. It was ancient, titanic, covered in armor etched with human scripture and warnings in every known galactic language. Do not wake gods forged in grief, and all of it for one child. Because to humanity, one child wasn't one, it was everything. It was tomorrow. It was trust. And now, trust had been broken beyond repair. The Council tried to justify it, claimed it was procedural error, claimed they didn't know he was a child. But Earth already knew the truth. They didn't care. Not until they realized what humanity was truly capable of when it stopped caring back. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. And that's the moment the galaxy realized. They didn't just kill a child, they broke the seal on Earth's final restraint. And there would be no going back. Did you think Earth would beg, that it would bow, plead, or negotiate after watching one of its children die in the cold hands of an alien tribunal? Earth didn't scream, it didn't rant, it didn't raise its banners. It did something far more terrifying. It went quiet, a kind of silence so absolute, it sent ripples across communication networks, unsettling even the most hardened species who had once marked humanity's sentimentality. Because Earth's silence has never meant surrender, it means calculation, preparation, a storm behind sealed doors. The moment news of the child's death reached Earth's core channels, everything changed, but not outwardly. Earth didn't fire a shot or issue ultimatums. Instead, subspace relay traffic dropped to zero. Every Earth-based ambassador was recalled. Civilian broadcasts cut to black. Even entertainment networks went down without warning. From the outside, it looked like a glitch. From within, it was the tightening of a fist. Behind that curtain of silence, entire systems that hadn't run in centuries were spinning back to life. Dormant ties began sinking in quantum alignment. Orbital defense grids rerouted energy from solar arrays into classified conduits not even the highest-ranking officials had access to. Deep within the Pacific and Atlantic trenches, crust-level seismic activity suggested movement to something under the crust. Not natural, not tectonic, deliberate. Why? Because Earth wasn't responding with rage. It was responding with protocol. One protocol, the final one. You see, long ago, long before Earth ever joined the Galactic Council, humanity knew what it was capable of. After the first expansion wars, when mankind merely shattered itself trying to become something greater, it made a promise. Never again would it unleash its full wrath unless the cause was absolute. The trigger would never be politics, territory, or resources. No, those were fleeting things. Would harm a child, harm the idea of innocence itself. That was the line. The Council didn't know about the old systems buried under kilometers of hardened Earth. They didn't know about the codes hidden in Earth's DNA archive, only activated by loss, betrayal, and grief strong enough to fracture species-wide trust. They didn't know that humanity's truest weapons were buried not in orbit, but in memory. Weapons tied to emotion, not orders. That's what the silence was. Not fear, not delay. It was awakening. And slowly, across the far edges of the solar system, odd signals began leaking out of warped gravitational pulses, ancient military frequencies long thought extinct, and heat signatures far too massive to be anything conventional. Interceptors sent to scan the anomalies vanished mid-transmission. What little data remained showed impossible structures, not built, grown, born. The silence continued. Earth's government remained unseen. The UNCC, United Nations Core Command, gave no press conference, no leaked footage. But above every major city, shimmering distortions began to form, as if reality itself was flexing. Civilians didn't panic. They knew. They felt it. Earth wasn't falling. Earth was remembering. Alien intelligence networks scrambled. Council analysts argued. Was it a bluff? Was humanity collapsing inward under grief? Was this mourning or madness? But to the veterans or those who remembered the early wars, who had seen the ancient fleets buried under Neptune's ice or Mars's forgotten defense rings, they knew better. They knew that Earth had never been tamed. It had simply been sleeping, waiting for the one moment when its soul was shaken hard enough to unlock what should have stayed buried. And now it was happening. The child's death wasn't just a wound, it was a signal, a key, a final confirmation that the universe had once again forgotten who humans really were and what they had hidden to protect it from themselves. This silence, this eerie, unnatural stillness from the species once known for its emotion, it wasn't weakness, it was thunder waiting to speak. Do you know what a species does when it builds something so powerful, so terrifying, that even they fear it? They hide it. They bury it so deep, not just beneath rock and ocean, but beneath history itself, erased from textbooks, locked behind encrypted myths, erased from all maps and minds. That's what Earth did with the God Fleet, not because it was a weapon of war, but because it was a weapon of last resort, a fleet designed not to win battles but to end wars forever. Long before the Galactic Council was formed, humanity had tested what it was to be a god among stars. During the first expansion, when Earth was young and wild in the galactic void, it created titanic warships capable of unmaking planets, folding space-time, and burning civilizations out of existence, and not for power, but out of fear. Fear of being colonized, fear of extinction, fear of being powerless. That fear forged the god fleet of ships with names taken from Earth's darkest myths: Naraka, Helios Unbound, Leviathan, Fenrir Prime, each one built with the technology of desperation and the emotions of near extinction. But as humanity matured, it realized something chilling. The god fleet wasn't built to protect it, it was built to overreact. These ships didn't target threats, they erased ecosystems. They didn't disable armies, they silenced galaxies. And so, after the War of 13 Suns, when the last of humanity's enemies was gone, and the silence of victory felt more like guilt, Earth chose to do something unthinkable. It locked the god fleet away. Some were entombed beneath the Mariana Trench, wrapped in magnetic nets and buried under false tectonic activity. Others were sunk into the lava veins of Icelandic fault lines, made undetectable by radiation cloaking fields. A few were launched into low orbit under cloaking spheres disguised as harmless satellites, orbiting silently for centuries. The fleet was not disarmed. It couldn't be, but it was sealed with keys spread across human conscience and algorithmic trust codes, designed to only awaken if Earth ever faced a threat beyond reason, a threat no treaty could resolve, no negotiation could undo. And then, one child was killed. That was enough. The death didn't trigger the fleet immediately and not directly. Instead, it activated the ancient Sentinel Protocol, a buried instruction in Earth's planetary defense. The protocol scanned the death, not just the biology, but the intent behind it. It measured the child's fear, the authority behind the execution, the diplomatic response or lack of one. And the moment it concluded this was not a random act of war, but an ideological strike against Earth's core values, the decision was made. Awaken the gods. The first system to activate was beneath the Atlantic, not a ship, but the command node, a multi-layered eye interface known as Lucifer Zero. It initiated a cascade of signals and deep pulses encoded in ancient quantum patterns only the fleet Psi could understand. Across Earth's oceans and skies, hidden chambers opened, cryocores warmed. Our minds are silent for 500 years. Began thinking again, not as tools, not as weapons, but as judges. No human commanded them. They were never meant to be controlled. That was part of the safety design. Once awakened, they would move not under political directive, but under principle. And they remembered the principle they were built for. When the galaxy forgets who humanity is, remind them. And so the ships began to rise, not with flame, not with noise, but with a quiet, apocalyptic inevitability, like mountains lifting from the ocean floor, each vessel displacing clouds, dragging lightning behind them, powered by energy cores that hadn't hummed in centuries. They looked like titans from mythology, angular, massive, adorned with strange glowing runes that weren't just symbols, but code bonding promises etched onto armor. In the Council's most secure war room, panic broke. Live feeds blinked on, impossibly massive ships lifting into orbit, weapons online. Readings went off the charts, radiation spikes, gravitational fluctuations, lockdowns. They thought the god fleet was legend, something poetic, forgotten. But it wasn't forgotten, it was forgiven. In Sia and only once, the god fleet had returned, and it wasn't here to negotiate, it wasn't here to reclaim territory. It was here for one reason: they killed a human child. And that was the last thing Earth would ever let the galaxy forget. The message arrived like a ghost through the stars, calm, controlled, and cold as the void. No alarms, no countdown, no posturing speeches, just a single, unshakable sentence that passed through every comm relay, every orbital station, every council archive and trade frequency at once. It didn't even have a known source, it simply existed, and once heard, it couldn't be unheard. You killed a child. We remember. That was it. No follow-up transmission. No request for dialogue. Just that one sentence, spoken in perfect, neutral cadence, translated instantly into every known galactic tongue, with emotional inflection tailored by Earth's sight to pierce the heart of each species that heard it. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The stillness behind them made them louder than a fleet of war horns. In council chambers across the core worlds, Delegates stared at each other in silence. A few laughed nervously, stupidly up until they realized the data stream wasn't a bluff. This wasn't propaganda. It wasn't even communication. It was a verdict. On Violent Prime, a media I tried to spin the message as a protest to some rogue human fringe group reacting to the tragic incident. The eye was deleted 5 seconds later by a pulse that came from deep space, followed by a complete blackout of the station. No explosion, no trace, just nothingness, like a string plucked out of existence. Farther out, merchant vessels picked up long-range energy signatures matching no known propulsion technology, just distant distortions in space-time and electromagnetic shockwaves too vast to come from ordinary ships. These weren't launches, these were awakenings, as if the stars themselves had shifted. Every race that had once doubted Earth's resolve began to reevaluate. This wasn't a species lashing out emotionally. This was precision vengeance executed with the patience of something ancient, something that didn't need to roar, because it had already decided. And still, nothing else was said. No declaration of war, no list of demands, not even a statement of intent. That silence after such a simple message was more terrifying than any threat the galaxy had ever known, because only a species that had nothing left to explain could be this quiet. Only a force that no longer needed permission could be this composed. "You killed a child." We remember. Those 6 words carried the weight of something bigger than punishment. They spoke of memory, a deep, cultural memory burned into Earth's identity. It wasn't about a strategic response. It was about the principle that even a single act against innocence could echo through the bones of an entire world. The galaxy had forgotten what kind of species humans really were, not because Earth had changed, but because it had restrained itself, played along, tolerated insults, suffered arrogance. But that restraint was never weakness. It was a shield, a choice. Now that choice had been revoked, and with just one sentence, Earth let the stars know. There would be no second warning, only consequences. They didn't come to conquer. They didn't come to fight for territory or pride. When the God fleet moved, it did so with chilling clarity, not as an army, but as judgment made manifest. The ships emerged across multiple sectors in perfect silence. No war drums, no dramatic formations, just precision, absolute, terrifying precision. From orbit, they looked like obsidian monoliths drifting through space, their hulls glowing with slow, pulsing sigils of ancient human languages encoded into quantum fiber, unreadable to most, but instantly understood by all. These ships weren't bound by standard weaponry. Their arsenals were deeper than firepower. Each vessel carried not only devastating weapon systems, but ancient consciousness, AI constructs formed from the amalgam of Earth's greatest tacticians, historians, philosophers, and broken-hearted survivors of previous wars. They were built not just to destroy, but to decide. When they entered Council space, they didn't fire on the border patrols. They didn't engage the outer fleets. They scanned AIMA deeply, ruthlessly, and moved past. Innocent, irrelevant. They weren't here to play politics. They were here to deliver outcomes. Entire planets went dark without a single explosion. On the world of Hull, once a thriving trade hub in sight of the child's execution, the fleet didn't drop bombs. Instead, every ship, satellite, and communications relay was disabled within 0.7 seconds. Power grids collapsed. Environmental controls froze. Civilian transports halted mid-flight and slowly drifted downward as if gravity had simply decided to change its mind. No one died instantly. There was no blood, just silence. Cold, suffocating, unnatural. The air grew still. Skies turned gray. And then, one by one, memory cores across the planet, those containing political records, trial transcripts, execution orders, were extracted into hard light and vaporized in orbit, atom by atom, as if erasing the crime from the fabric of the universe itself. Those who had given the order to execute the child, the ones who smirked behind their alien laws and bureaucratic shields, they didn't get a trial. They didn't get the beg. The God fleet didn't acknowledge their surrender signals. It already knew everything about them. Each of them simply disappeared. No alarms, no ships, no mess. Their neural signatures were lifted from existence by precision-engineered weapons that left no trace. Even their bloodlines were sterilized, not through violence, but by timeline editing and subtle manipulations in gravitational waves that prevented their ancestors from making key decisions, rendering their futures void. This was not genocide. It was surgical extinction. The galaxy tried to rationalize what it was seeing, but it couldn't. This wasn't war. This was what came after all wars failed. What came when peace was broken by something so pure, so fragile a child, and then treated as collateral damage. Council fleets scrambled to reposition, to protect other colonies, but nothing could lock on to the God fleet's trajectory. By the time defensive positions were activated, the ships were already gone, vanished into deep space, off every chart, cloaked in physics even the Council's brightest minds couldn't unravel. And then another world was judged, and another, but not all, because the fleet didn't just destroy, it discerned. Some planets were spared, systems that had no hand in the crime, that had tried to speak out, tried to intervene, were left untouched. Ships hovered over them, scanned their entire planetary networks, and departed without a sound. It wasn't mercy, it was clarity. The God fleet had no hatred, no bloodlust. It did not punish blindly. It was the embodiment of a species that once believed in restraint but now dared to remember what it had buried long ago. The kind of power that doesn't scream, it simply arrives. And when it does, there's no war, only truth, delivered with unblinking eyes and weapons older than the stars. They begged. Not at first, of course. At first, the Council clung to its Pridea broadcasting demands, declaring Earth a rogue state, accusing humanity of violating interstellar law. But that was before the God fleet moved beyond border systems, before it started arriving in orbit over Council worlds, not with fleets or warning shots, but with judgment already decided. That was when the begging began. Higher-ranking delegates sent emergency transmissions to Earth, sold diplomatic channels. Entire planetary governments submitted full surrender protocols signed, verified, and broadcast in every known language. Offers of reparations, tributes, apologies. Entire races offering to disown the individuals responsible for the child's death. It didn't matter, because by then, the God fleet was already in motion and it did not take orders from presidents, kings, or councils. It didn't answer to Earth's current governments, either. It had no seat in the United Nations Core Command. The fleet was older than Earth's current diplomacy, older than the Council itself. It answered to one law, coded into its psi and its quantum soul centuries ago: when innocence is murdered without consequence, consequence will no longer wait for permission. And so, the surrender signals were received but ignored. Over the skies of Zeratal, the capital world of the Third Council signatory, thousands gathered in its platinum towers, watching as the shadows of the God fleet fell across their atmosphere. Their planetary shield network, once thought impenetrably, glitched and collapsed without a single projectile fired. It wasn't destroyed. It simply stopped working, as if the fleet had whispered to the system that its job was over. From orbit, a single ship descended slowly, a Helios Unbound, one of the oldest, most feared vessels in the fleet's ancient hierarchy. It didn't fire a shot. It didn't transmit a threat. It only hovered above the Council's central administration dome, casting a shadow so immense it blotted out the sky for over 20 minutes. The Council's emergency delegation, huddled inside the dome's sub-level bunkers, transmitted surrender after surrender, their voices shaking, their language slipping into panic. But no answer came, because the fleet wasn't listening. It wasn't here for deals. It wasn't here to negotiate or punish. It had no political purpose. Its objective was not revenge, it was rectification. It came for the names embedded in its directive, every voice, every hand, every authority involved in the execution of the human child. Not just those who gave the order, but those who stood silent. Those who chose neutrality in the face of cruelty. They were not wiped out in explosions or floods of gunfire that would have been merciful. No, the God fleet didn't believe in spectacle. Instead, one by one, each target was removed from existence surgically. In the space of 3.7 seconds, the entire planetary chain of command ceased to exist, and not killed, not exiled, but deleted. Their ships powered down, their names scrubbed from every Council database, their genetic lines overwritten mid-sequence using a technology no race could reverse. The message was brutal in its elegance: you do not get to apologize after innocence dies. This wasn't retaliation. This wasn't a war crime. This was balance. enforced by an intelligence that had watched humanity cry, build, bury, and break over millennia and had decided it would never let this happen again, no matter the cost. When the next world tried to surrender, it offered not just resources or live assets, it offered itself as a protectorate, begging Earth to take control. But again, no answer came. The God fleet passed overhead, ran its scan, judged the planet uninvolved, and moved on. Because this wasn't conquest, it was judgment, and judgment did not care for surrender. It cared only for truth. They remembered, long before the Council ever learned to fear Earth, there were others who had already tasted humanity's fury. Empires that once clashed with Earth during the First and Second Expansion Wars, those that had burned colonies, shattered treaties, and pushed humanity to the brink. They were old enemies, rivals, at one point, existential threats. But when the God fleet rose, they didn't see an enemy reawakening. They saw a storm the galaxy had forgotten, and this time, they did not stand against it. The moment the first God ship reached orbit, those ancient foes scattered across the fringes of known space recognized the signs, not the political implications, the pattern, the energy waves, the quiet, the weight in the air that came just before systems fell silent. Because they had been there before, during the original campaigns that forged the God fleet, they had seen what happened when humanity stopped negotiating and started remembering. And this time, they made a different choice. They aligned with Earth. The first signal came from the Ralton Confederacy, a species of scaled warriors whose honor code once led them into brutal conflict with human colonies. Their high war priest, 73 cycles old and scarred from past wars, transmitted a public declaration to all council members: Earth grieves. And when Earth grieves, you do not run, you stand beside Ida or be swept away. Soon after, the Red Syndicate, a technocratic species that once tried to destabilize Earth's planetary economy, activated their stealth armadas, but not to fight the God fleet, to protect its flanks. They formed silent corridors through council space, jamming enemy sensors and feeding intel directly into Earth's old relay systems. No flags, no treaties, just movement, loyalty through fear, yes, but also through memory. These were not acts of pity or opportunism. They were survival instincts sharpened by experience. The enemies who had once watched Earth lose control understood what the Council still didn't. Humanity doesn't stay broken, it reforges itself in fire, and when that fire becomes cold, calculated judgment, and nothing survives in its path unless it chooses to. And so, former enemies became silent allies, not through diplomacy, but through reverence. Because they knew what the others had forgotten. They had seen the eyes of human soldiers whose homes were burned, whose children were lost, whose hearts had turned from forgiveness to purpose. They remembered fleets blacking out entire constellations. They remembered Earth's ability to outlast, outfight, and outthink. Not because it was the strongest species, but because it was the most willing to become what it hated, if it meant protecting what it loved. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about what happens when grief evolves into precision. When ancient rage doesn't expedia, it unfolds. By the time the God fleet entered the heart of Council space, Earth's enemies had become its shields. Alien battle cruisers escorted the ships. Mining colonies offered raw materials for resupply without being asked. Interstellar listening posts, once used to track human movements, now rebroadcasted the fleet's positions to keep the path clear. They weren't trying to stop the storm. They were trying to stay out of its way. Because to these ancient foes, Earth's rage wasn't just justified, it was sacred. The Council's homeworld didn't fall, it vanished. When the God fleet finally reached the heart of the Galactic Council, the origin of its rulings, its arrogance, its cold bureaucracy, it didn't unleash fire. It didn't train missiles or shatter cities from orbit. No shockwaves to war through the ground. No cries echoed into space. What happened was far more final. Nothing. The God fleet arrived in perfect silence. A formation of ancient, monstrous vessels encircled the planet, each one humming with impossible energy. Each one focused, locked, ready. And then without a word up they acted. Not with destruction, but removal. The air around the planet shifted. Space itself bent inward. From orbit, the blue-gray world seemed to ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. Buildings, vehicles, Entire mountain ranges flickered and then began to disassemble, atom by atom, thought by thought. There was no sound, there was no struggle. Everything simply ceased to be. No debris, no corpses, no escape pods fleeing in desperation. The very existence of the Council's homeworld, its mass, its gravity, its memory was unraveled like thread from a spool. Stars in nearby systems blinked strangely as if reacting to the erasure of something once deeply tied into the balance of that region of space. Navigation charts auto-updated, stellar maps redrew themselves. The coordinates were still there, but nothing remained. This wasn't annihilation, it was deletion. Like the Council had never been. The fleet didn't need to explain its actions, it didn't upload manifestos, it didn't carve warnings into what was left, because there was no need. The absence was the message. This is what happens not when you go to war with Earth, but when you betray the one sacred rule humanity refuses to compromise. You do not harm our children. Across the galaxy, billions watched. From royal thrones to refugee camps, every sentient being understood. Earth hadn't sought revenge, it hadn't sought justice. It had carried out a correction. The Council wasn't destroyed for power. It wasn't punished for politics. It was erased for arrogance, for believing Earth's silence meant submission, for thinking that taking the life of a single human child wouldn't ripple across time, history, and reality itself. The Godfleet didn't return fire. It didn't argue moral high ground. It simply looked at the center of galactic authority, weighed its worth, and made its choice. And now, where a shining capital once stood, a proud, untouchable, above consequentia, there was only silence, a silence louder than any war. 72 hours after the first ship rose, the Godfleet disappeared. Just as suddenly as it had awakened, it went still. No final broadcast, no last attack. One by one, the ancient warships turned, altered course, and vanished into deep space corridors known only to Earth. No engines flared, no aftershocks followed. It was like watching shadows melt back into the darkness they'd come from. A colossal, quiet, and deliberate. They didn't dock at spaceports. They didn't return to any known base. They didn't descend into Earth's skies. Instead, they slipped back into the black under oceans, beneath ice, inside the gravity wells of hidden moons, back into the forgotten vaults of Earth's history. Sealed once more, but not sleeping, waiting. On the surface, Earth resumed its rhythm. Civilian networks came back online. Diplomats reappeared. Trade lanes reopened. To the untrained eye, it looked like peace, but every race that had witnessed the silence, the erasure, the precision with which the Godfleet operated up, they knew better. The galaxy had changed forever, because now, there was something far worse than a declared threat. There was the memory, the knowledge that somewhere reburied beneath Earth's surface or floating just beyond perception of those ships still existed, not as tools of conquest, but as warnings written in steel, time, and grief. They weren't just weapons, they were consequences, forged into form, and they had only emerged for one reason: to remind the stars what Earth was willing to become when it was forced to remember who it truly was. The Council was gone. Entire governments had been reduced to whispers, and Earth said nothing about it afterward. No speech, no victory parade, no justification, because Earth didn't need to justify anything. It had already said everything with a single sentence: "You killed a child." We remember. That memory now echoed in every chamber, every strategy room, every training hall across the stars, not in fear of war, but in fear of what would happen if Earth ever decided to finish what it began. Peace returned, but it returned on Earth's terms. And across the stars, one law became unspoken, universal, and absolute: do not test the silence of humanity, and above all, never touch Earth's children.